So we continue our discussion in the sugya of yesh brera or en brera. Just review for those who just walk in. The idea of yesh brera and en brera, it's go around the entire Talmud in many locations. The idea of, as an example, we mentioned in last talk, when you have a jar of wine and its oil came in, and you need to pull out the oil from the wine, like the Gemara, the Talmud said in Tractate Beitzah. So it's a dispute, it's a controversy if yesh berai or en berai, if you can pull it out or not. So in that sense, here is another version of the talk of the negotiation between the two great Tanaim, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So Rav Papa said, Kisin alugin ramale, which means that when Reish Lakish discussed this with Rabbi Yochanan, it's a contradiction between our Mishnah and the idea of lugin of wine. It's applied to the Tanya. For this was in the Braita, like variation of the different Mishnayot. Halokeach yain mibein hakutim. So a person purchased from the Kutim. Kutim is the group of people that was a question about them being Jewish or not Jewish, etc. So it was a issue that since he have this portion, he need to separate a part as a contribution. It's called truma. Now, in general, if you have a bag, what we said earlier in Kisim, remember we said you have a bag filled of coin. So you have a bag filled of coins. So we said earlier that if it's wrapped up and he hold it in such a way, so you cannot use it for any purposes because it's wrapped up in certain way. But when it's come to Hekdesh, or someone who contributed to Hekdesh, and you have this big bag filled of coin, then the question is, if you take one coin and you pull it out, can you do that? In other words, if you have an open bag filled of coin, and he said one coin is going to be an Hekdesh, if you can pull out each and every one of them until the last one, and in that sense, Rabbi Akiva hold that it's like an Hekdesh, that in that sense it's okay. Now, here is the example. When you have a wine, imagine that it's Erev Shabbat, it's the eve of Shabbat, and someone purchased from the Kutim, at that time Kutim, which is the group that you're not sure about the kashrut of their wine, but he purchased it, and in that sense of kashrut is the issue of separating part that goes to the Hekdesh, which is there are an obligation like Truma Gdola to give one contribution to the Kohen. You remember we discussed it? Mm-hmm. And then is another tenth you need to give to the Levi, to the Levi. So in that sense, he need to separate that part before he enjoy that food. It's not applied only to wine products. It's applied to any food that need to give that portion. It's a tight obligation that the Torah require a person to separate before he eats and use it for himself.
So just so I understand, since the Kutim were converted to Judaism, so they were, and it wasn't accepted conversion generally.
And it wasn't accepted in the sense that even though it was accepted, it was a question if they are really in a trust to take part and give it truma.
So but the idea is that the wine could be kosher coming from him, from the Kutim, but there was just a question as to whether the tithes were taken out appropriatly. So you had to take that responsibility on yourself when you bought it from him.
Correct. Now the problem is it's Erev Shabbat. It's getting close to Shabbat. You do not have the sufficient time or other need to do that separation. So can you retroactively take part and contribute it in condition that after the Shabbat is over, you're going to give it to the Kohen, Truma Gdola, or the Levi, his portion, etc. Is that
so
acceptable?
You make a conscious decision that you're going to leave some
Or you spell it out. You said, I am going to take...
I'm going to leave X amount for...
Imagine a simple language you have...
Instead of taking it out first, you say you're going to leave it in the bottom.
Right, let's say you have a box of oranges, and you just collected it, and you need to take a portion.
Right.
So, can you make a condition before Shabbat to take part and separate for the Kohen and separate for Levi, and then the rest, whatever it is, you can use for yourself, or a portion that you need, you can use for yourself. That's the question. So let's think together the mindset of those great sages. If you tell me yesh breira meaning yes, you can breira, you can livro, you can separate. So in that sense, Rabbi Meir hold, you can take a part, you can separate that part from the others, and in the future you can give it to them, meaning after Shabbat. So,
but the point is that what he holds is you have to actually take it out before, you have to separate it before Shabbat.
Excellent point. That's exactly what Rabbi Meir said. He said beferush, you need to spell it out, not necessarily physically taking a portion,
but make that conscious,
making a statement.
Right.
So that's what he said. Detnan, הלוקח יין מבין הכותים. So since we know usually that the Kutim, they are idol worshipper, they come from Kuta, from Ashur, other countries that it's a question if the 10 tribes, not 10 tribes, they settle in Samaria, and it was a big question about their conversion. Let's say if you can read in the book of Kings, second book of Kings, chapter 17, you read at length one of the problems. So it's a very serious dispute among the rabbis if they really convert, or that it's not a sincere convert and they're not. So since it was a question with them, so they are under the category of some type of worship idols, and therefore they make their wine as a yain nesech, which means that it's prohibited to use. So here this Braita speaks about Kutim, that we accept their conversion and we think that they are real Jewish, right?
Yeah, it says...
So if that's the case, then you need to give... Yes?
Yeah, no, just saying that it says, the conversion was valid despite the questionable motives, which was...
You see, you read from your book.
Where it says,
nice.
In fact...
The motive is another
the Kutim were a foreign people who were brought by the Assyrians to inhabit the northern part of Eretz Yisrael, from which they had exiled the 10 tribes. The Kutim subsequently converted to Judaism in response to an outbreak of attacks by wild animals in that part of Eretz Yisrael. According to some Tanaim, including the Tana of this particular Bereisha, their conversion was valid despite their questionable motives.
But even it's valid, you're asking a question about Trumot Umasrot.
Thus, they are considered Jews, and produce grown in the land is treated like produce grown in the land of any other Jew living in Eretz Yisrael, which is subject to the obligatory Teruma and Maser tithes. However, the Kutim did not fully observe the Torah's laws, and they did not in general observe the laws of Truma and Maser. Thus, one who purchased produce from them was obligated to separate Teruma and Maser.
All right. So now we see what's the issue here. Very nice, David. So what happened is, if a person have a question, this is Erev Shabbat, so what should we do? He said, Omer, Shnei Lugin, She'ani Atid Le'afrish, the 2 Lugin that I will eventually separate from these 100 Lugin of wine, Harei hen Truma, they became Truma, right? And then Asara Maaser Rishon, 10 Lugin, right? Eventually separate as the first tithe, the first Maaser. Tish'a, 9 Lugin, Maaser Sheni, right? It's the second one of the tithe, right? After Maaser Rishon separate, is the second time separate the one that give to the we said one is lekohen, one is for Levi, umeichel, and then he can basically take this part and can use it. In Hebrew you call it chilul maaser. He take this maaser and in a sense he separated that. Veshote miyad. So therefore the yain doesn't have the isur tevel. He doesn't have this prohibition of tevel, and he can go ahead and drink it. So that's the divrei Rabbi Meir. That was of Rabbi Meir. What does that mean? Let's think deeply. Rabbi Meir hold that there is breira, yesh breira, which means it is okay as long as he said a clear statement to go ahead and to do that and then use what he needs right away. So I give you an example, just as another example nowadays. Someone asked me the other day, he bought a utensil and he didn't duck them, he didn't tovel them. You know, there is a idea of tvilat kelim, wash. You know, like next to Aguda, you can tovel the vessels, right?
Right.
So it was Erev Shabbat. He purchased that. He didn't have a time to go ahead and tovel the dishes. Okay. So I told him, if he make a clear statement that right after Shabbat he's going to use it, it's okay at this point, Erev Shabbat, to use it for this Shabbat with condition that he make it clearly that right after Shabbat is going to tovel that. So you can do it in that sense, yesh brera. In our sugya, yesh brera, you can do it retroactively, and that's Rabbi Meir hold, as long as you said it clearly. However, many other rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Osrim, all the other rabbis said it, you can do that. So let's think again. We said earlier that Rabbi Akiva said in the Mishnah, afilu bestam, even a person have this big jar of coins, right? And he said one of these coins is going to be hekdesh. So yachol leodia, he can make this announcement and it's breira, you can hold it. So in that sense, Rabbi Meir hold the same as Rabbi Yehuda.
And that can be the last coin.
Last coin,
yep.
Right. But here, we said that all these, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, all these great rabbis, osrim, they prohibit to do it, right? So if they prohibit to do it, what happens is, because they don't hold the principle of breira, which means they hold that ein breira, which means that they hold that the person declaration cannot render in that sense retroactively, that which we drink chilulim, which was leave over the trumai maaser, right? So in that sense, they have a very strong opinion. They said, if a person may hold that we want at the first place a person to say clearly that this part is going to but he hold even in that sense, but the avad, he just intend to do it, it's okay. Here they said the only way to say it is if he express it clearly. So, but if he doesn't say it clearly, even he think about it, etc., it's not clear that it happens retroactively. So they basically hold that in that sense that the two lugim that he should eventually separate, right? The designation can made now subject to a later identification only when a person stipulates in such a way that eventually it's this part is going to go to Hekdesh. But because the principle of Breira, he said here is not the pruta that he said I purchased shall be Hekdesh without very clearly expressing the stipulation. So the pruta that are eventually identified as Hekdesh. So therefore they hold in that sense that is a ein Breira.
So Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon essentially require that you physically remove.
Physically make the declaration.
So you make the declaration, pull it aside, and set it aside for.
Yes,
okay.
yes. In other words, if it was a mental intent, right? Even with the somehow expressions, it's not sufficient.
Is that considered lechatchila? Then to do it that way, or
in
what's
that sense, you can use the word lechatchila b'diavad, but it's go much deeper. It's not just speaking here about the lugin. It speaks much deeper in conjunction to the previous machloket the whole issue with Rabbi Akiva with the Hekdesh, with the coin. So the whole point of taking a coin and making an Hekdesh, that's the key issue here. So in the conclusion, let's finish this Masechet. So Rabbi Yochanan resolution, he said, Amar lei, Rabbi Yochanan said the Reish Lakish, Seifa de matniti, right? The clause of our Mishnah, it's actually referred to what? Be'omer lo yipater kis ze min ha'ekdesh, which means it's not a contradiction, because as long as he spelled out that the last coin it's hekdesh, so it's basically making it also to the whole idea of Breira, and it's not a contradiction between the two, because he intend to have that the whole bag, the whole kiss being a hekdesh. So the fact that it turned to be the last coin, it's fine. So this little coin is sanctified, because in that sense yesh brera, right?
Right.
And then הוברר הדבר למפריע, it's understand retroactively that this coin, it's לכתחילה became an הקדש. Okay? הדרן הלך, השליח עשה שליחותו, וסליקה למסכת מילה. Let's start a little bit מסכת קינים.
Okay.
The next, which is part of the daf today. Just very abbreviated word of מסכת קינים. What is מסכת קינים is all about? Okay. The Tractate Kinim in general, dealing with two separate two type of bird offering, but it's a two different type. One it's called chata, like sin offering, and one it's called ola, which is some offering that it's all burned. Now, in general, the idea of Cain, the idea of Kinim, which means the pair of birds, usually when you see the birds, they have pairs. It's always go by the pair. You have like zugofo, the pair of birds. It's very common. You see as an example in the book of Bereshit, the Torah said, Kinim ta'aseh tateiva. It's in Bereshit, in Genesis 6, they said that it's a ken, it's a bird nest. There are several occasions. Now, what happened is, lechatchila, at the first place, the Kohen needs to come and consult, needs to come and ask advice how to do this ritual. But the avad, if it's not preferably, but if it happens, right? So if it's a question, then they make decision right on the spot. So here the Mishnah deal with the question if someone spell out, he said clearly that it's going to be ola, for example, then it's fine. But if it's a stuma, if the person, the owner of that offering did not spell out, did not specify what is going to be for, so then the Kohen is the one who makes this decision. Also, another part is the ritual itself, which is called haza'ah. You're taking the part and you spark it, right? So that made in the lower part of the altar, and the mitzui adam, and taking the spread blood, it's that ritual. It's in the top part of the altar, and now there are different categories. One is the bird's part. One is called the obligatory. The torim, the neonah, it's obligatory. The optional, the voluntarily, it's called nedava. That's all distracted dealing. It's come from the word kinim, ken, which is the bird nests. Now, for all of those people who are either vegan or vegetarian, so let's give one or two words to spell it out, since we are, for some of the people who are the beginners. People should understand, first and foremost, that the Torah is a living Torah and is extremely hypersensitive over tsar ba'alei chayim, over they do kindness to animals. You see it in many occasions, in many different places in the Torah, in the Mishnah, in the rabbinic writings, and in the Talmud. Just an example that come to my mind is a very famous story in the Talmud about Rebbe, that the president of the Jewish people, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So the story goes that it was a calf, very young calf, that ran away, and Rebbe was sitting and studying, and the little calf came and is like getting close to him and tried to hide behind his coat. In that sense, it's like the calf saying, they're about to slaughter me and I don't want to. Mm-hmm. And according to the Talmud, the narrative, Rebbe said to her, why are you hiding here? Go out, that's your that's the goal of your that's your destiny.
That's your purpose, yeah.
Yeah. So even in a sense he was right, because that was the intent. He was punished severely according to the Talmud for a period of about 12 or 13 years, something like that, I don't remember exactly, but about that period he has a very heavy, painful dental problems, teeth problems, that he suffered greatly. I don't have to tell you, someone need to do a root canal or things like that is a tremendous suffering. Until the Talmud said one day, it was one of the maintenance people in his house, and they saw all kind of small animals running around, and they tried to chase them and kill them, and Rabbi said, just leave them alone. And as a result, suddenly all of his dental issues stopped, which the Talmud tried to illustrate how hypersensitive we are for animals, kindness, not to create pain to animals, love animals. And you see it in the story of they release the mother and the bird in the mitzvah in the Torah. And you see in many locations in the Torah the tremendous amount of sensitivity that Torah has to animals. When you loaded the donkey, when you unloaded the donkey, there are many examples. So first and foremost, we must register in our mind that Judaism and the Torah are very much for animals' rights and loving animals. That's not out of question. There is another phase in the Torah, not only the Kabbalistic phase, but another one, that Creator created the world, and He created its creatures to serve Him, and He wants to uplift them to make them holy. It's not necessarily only in that sense apply to animals. It applies to anything in the world that needs to bring out the spark and make them holy. Researchers prove the way that the Torah asks, the way that the Talmud asks to do it, with the sharpening of the knives to do it, it should be in the least pain to animals, in the most kindest way to them, and the whole purpose is that to elevate. So some Kabbalah hold that is a spark of souls. But even we not go to that level, it's just the idea that even the food, it's holy. It's like my teacher used to say that the table we eat in our home is like an altar. And one of the reasons that we put the salt while we're making the hamotzi and eat the bread, it's because it's like the offering in our miniature temple in our own homes, and we're taking the bread and we spread the salt is like the offering, and we eat it, we sanctify ourselves, we sanctify the table, we make it holy, we say the word of the Torah, etc. It's all sanctification of ourselves, our soul, and our lives. So in that sense, we understand the concept of making these korbanot. As an example to that is the idea that it's open our hearts, which is when a person committed a sin and seeing the process, what's involved, even it's the least pain to animals. And the reality is that the world out there, if you go to slaughtering house and you see cruelty to animals, it's above and beyond words of disgust, okay? So the idea of eating, like most of the people in the world, right? But eating it in the least kindness while doing it in the most holiest way, in a sense, to sanctify those. And if someone is bringing an animal as an offering, and it means that it's the painless to animals, is not cutting out the species, making those separate, which is part is going to the Kohen, part to others, only if the Korban Olah, if the Olah offering, that it's all burned, is the idea that something will open the heart of a person when a process like that took place. And some even hold that the person should feel, it's me, in that sense. And it creates something in the heart of a person, it should be. So again, this is not a talk this morning about the importance of animals, just to give a background for those who are not familiar, why all this ritual is part of our Torah and part of our learning.
Well, the Torah is, I think, replete with examples of Jews treating animals very much with great deal of respect. I mean,
tremendous kindness.
The example of the location Sukkot, which was named specifically because that was the first place that anyone had ever built shelters for animals.
Correct. Sukkot.
Excellent. Because no one had ever done that before,
excellent.
So that was
Okay, so example. With that in mind, we go to the text where we said that a pair of the Kinim, of this animal, the bird offering, a pair of obligatory bird offering, it's known as a chovah, it's an obligation. So it's can designate by the owner, and he said specifically for that bird, it's a designated pair that it's going to be for the korban, or the undesignated pair that it's called setuma. So the Mishnah said as follow, right? So it's just a little bit background. Now we go to the Mishnah itself. Okay? Chatat ha'of na'aset lematan, which means the bird chatat, the offering of the bird, it's offered below the altar red line. V'chatat behema na'aset lemala, which means that if it's sprinkling the korban, the blood, it has to be lemata, which means the Kohen stand on the ritzpat azara, on the floor of the azara, right, from the body of the altar, and he takes, which is called the chuta sikra, and he spread it. Now, chatat behema, when it's come to the behema, which is the animal, not the bird, okay? So what happened is he's standing on the side, on the soveva mizbeach, right, which is the above the red line. Olat ha'of na'aset lemala, a bird olah is over above the red line. Ve'olat behema lematan, an animal olah over below the red line. So all this idea of sparking this blood, it's called mitzui adam. So it made on the highest part of the offering. Now the Mishnah make a statement, and they said, "Ve'im shina bazeh uvazeh pasul," which means if he deviate this from this case to another case, so it's invalid. Which means if he made one part from one chatat of one place, instead of making it in the highest part of the mizbeach to the lowest, so the korban is invalid. Okay? Now, another important part. Seder kinim kachu. In order to take a pair of birds, so you have to do it in a process. Hachova, the pair board is an obligation. Echad chatat ve'echad olah. One bird is chatat and one bird is olah. Remember, olah is the one that is totally burned on the altar. Bindarim uvendavot. If in the case of vow offering to donate an offering, kulan olot, the all pair of birds, they all became an olah, which means The difference is neder and nedava it's something that the person did it voluntarily. Soon the Mishnah expressed the difference between them. Okay, but off, it's only as a sin offering or say ola. So it's different. So the Mishnah here goes to the specific. They say zeo neder. If a person make a vow of offering, what does that mean? Haomer harei ala ola. If one says, I make a decision that this one I take upon myself to bring it an olah offering. This specific animal. Ve'ezoi nedava, and what is donated offering? Haomer harei zo olah. If a person said that this bird is hereby sanctified as an olah offering. So the minute that the person said it specifically, if a person said it general, so it's a general, it's not specific korban. But if he mitnadev, if he said it is voluntarily, so it has to be a certain animal that he have to bring. So they said as follows: Ma ben nedarim le nedavot. What's the difference between vow offering and donated offering? That's a very important, if a person said specific or not. As we said earlier, there is a concept in the halacha, in the Mishnah here specifically, that said meforash, if a person specified, if he said clearly, or satum. If he said meforash, so it's olah. But if it's satum, if it's not clear what he meant, then the Kohen needs to make decision what exactly is going to happen, since the Be'alim lo pirshu, since the owner did not specify. So he said, what's the difference between vow offering and donated offering? Ela she'andarim metu or nignevu. In the case of vow offering, if die or stolen, chayav bar chayutan is responsible for replacing them. But if it was a voluntary act, nedavot, which means that the person donated offering and metu or nignevu, all of a sudden they die or they stolen. So the Mishnah said, ein chayav b'achayutan, ein chayav b'achayutan, meaning he is not obligated, he doesn't have the obligation to replace them. Why it's so important? Because the Gemara said in the Meila, so he said, the pasuk said, "V'nirtza lo lechaper alav," which means that it should be accepted for him to atone for him. So, so what exactly Rabbi Shimon tried to say? He said, "V'nirtza lo lechaper." When the Torah used the word "v'nirtza lo lechaper," that a person make a vow and he has to follow his vow if this really the korban atone, if this offering atone for him, which means that you take the blood and you sprinkle it. But as long as the korban, as long as the offering did not atone for him, so he did not fulfill the obligation of his making his vow. So we here make a distinction, and we said it's applied only when the person said alav, which means that when he accept upon himself to make an hegdesh and to sanctify it, which means that it's a clear vow.
Right. It seems to imply here that
voluntarily is not obligated.
It is incumbent upon me to bring an olah offering, meaning I have to.
You have to.
I have to. Whereas
right.
a net would be a vowed offering, and one who says this bird is hereby sanctified as an olah offering, just a donation.
Yes, and a specific. Just let you go for a second to the Gemara. So the next page they said, "Chatat shenitarva ba'olah." Since we said all these rules that we said, it's a lot of different mixing involved. So soon the Gemara speak about 3 different types of mixing, which means number of chatat birds become mixed with a number of olah birds, mixture of chatat birds with olah mixture of a undesigned pair, right? Etc. So it's all kind of different mixing of kinim, of different birds. So the Mishnah, the second Mishnah said here, chatat shenitarva be'olah, if a chatat bird became part with the number of olah birds, ועולה שנתערבה בחטאת and עולה bird, which became intermingled with number of חטאת birds, אפילו אחד בריבו, even if one such bird offering became together commingled with 10,000 bird offering of other types, ימותו כולם, all of them must die. Why? Because that neither bird of two opposite types of offering, which is חטאת and עולה, become mixed together, may be offered, because each require a distinctive and maturely exclusive type of service, and therefore, since it was a clear designated to something, if it's mixed together, then you cannot use it, because you cannot bring someone as a specific olah or a specific chatat, because he may put the one is supposed to be down of the
below
altar,
the
below, make
above
it high, or something that's supposed to be above, you make it below. So since it's all mixed up, so you cannot use it for the purpose of korbanot.